A billionaire forced his son to marry the humble waitress to punish him. However, he was paralyzed by what his son died. I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop a comment. If you enjoyed the video, please hit that like button. Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories. What if the most powerful man in the city could force his son into a marriage meant as punishment, but the son finds something no amount of money could buy? What happens when a rebellious heir discovers love and purpose in the last place he expected? And what secret does the woman he's been forced to marry hide that will change everything? Stick around. This isn't just a story about family or control. It's about the choices that redefine legacy and the strength found in the most unexpected places. Jackson Carlisle leaned against the leather seat of his chauffeured Bentley, the city lights blurring past as the car sped toward a place he'd never heard of. Willow Creek, a speck of a town 3 hours from New York's glittering chaos. At 28, Jackson was everything his father wasn't: restless, idealistic, and allergic to the corporate cage Victor had built for him. With his tousled dark hair, sharp green eyes, and a smile that could charm a room, he'd spent years dodging boardroom battles for art galleries and late-night jazz clubs. But Victor, the unyielding patriarch of Carlisle Enterprises, saw his son's dreams as weakness, a betrayal of the empire he'd bled for. The photograph of Emma Lawson sat crumpled in Jackson's pocket. He hadn't looked at it since leaving. His father's office, a waitress, a nobody from nowhere. Victor's ultimatum was clear: marry her, live her life, and learn what it means to struggle. Refuse, and he'd be cut off, stripped of his trust fund, his name, his future. Jackson's first instinct was to run, to disappear into the world and never look back. But something stopped him. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was the flicker of curiosity about this woman who'd been thrust into his life like a punishment. Willow Creek was a stark contrast to Manhattan's polished edges. The main street was a patchwork of faded storefronts, a diner, a hardware store, and a gas station that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 80s. The air smelled of damp earth and pine, and the people moved with a quiet purpose that felt alien to Jackson. He stepped out of the car, his tailored coat out of place among the flannel and denim, and pushed open the door to Rosie's Diner. The bell above the door jingled and heads turned. Jackson felt the weight of curious stares, but his eyes locked. On her, Emma Lawson. She was behind the counter, pouring coffee with a steady hand, her auburn hair tied back in a loose ponytail. Her smile was warm but guarded, like someone who'd learned to keep the world at arm's length. She wasn't beautiful in the polished way of the women Jackson knew, but there was something arresting about her. Maybe the way her hazel eyes held a quiet strength, or the way she moved with purpose despite the faint shadows under her eyes. "You must be Jackson," she said, her voice soft but direct. No pretense, no fear, just a statement like she'd been expecting him. He nodded, unsure of what to say. "And you're Emma?" She wiped her hands on her apron and gestured to a booth. "Sit. Coffee's on me. We've got a lot to talk about." Emma Lawson was 26, but life had aged her beyond her years. She'd grown up in Willow Creek, raised by a single mother who worked double shifts at the same diner. Emma now called home. Her father had left when she was 5, and the town had been her family ever since. Nosy, loving, and fiercely protective. But Emma carried a secret heavier than the tray she balanced. A diagnosis of lupus, a chronic illness that flared unpredictably, draining her energy and threatening her future. She told no one, not even her mother, because pity was a luxury she couldn't afford. Every penny she earned went to her mother's medical bills and keeping their small house from foreclosure. When Victor Carlisle's lawyer arrived with a proposal, marry his son, live with him for a year, and receive enough money to secure her family's future, Emma's first instinct was to laugh. It sounded like a bad rom-com, but the numbers on the contract weren't a joke. $500,000 more than she'd see in a lifetime of tips. She'd said yes, not for herself, but for her mother, for the house, for a chance to breathe. Jackson, however, was less pragmatic. Sitting across from her in the booth, he leaned forward, his voice low. "Let's get one thing straight. I'm not here to play house. This is my father's game, and I don't intend to follow his rules." Emma raised an eyebrow, unfazed. Good. I'm not here to be your trophy wife. This is a deal, not a fairy tale. We do this, we get through it, and we both walk away with what we need. Her bluntness caught him off guard. He'd expected tears, maybe resentment, but not this quiet steel. You're okay with marrying a stranger? Just like that? She shrugged, her eyes flickering with something unreadable. Life's full of things you don't choose. You learn to make the best of it. Their first weeks together were a clash of worlds. Jackson moved into Emma's small, creaky house, a far cry from his penthouse. The pipes groaned, the heater was temperamental, and the couch sagged in the middle. He grumbled about the lack of Wi-Fi, the slow pace of the town, the way everyone seemed to know his business. Emma, meanwhile, worked 12-hour shifts, came home to cook for her mother, and ignored Jackson's brooding presence. But cracks began to form in his armor. He noticed the way Emma never complained, even when she looked exhausted. He saw how she slipped extra food to a homeless man outside the diner, how she listened to the regular stories with genuine care. One night he found her in the kitchen balancing her checkbook with a frown so deep it made his chest ache. "Why do you do it?" he asked, startling her. "Work yourself to death for this place." She didn't look up. "Because it's home. These people, this town, they're mine. You wouldn't get it." He wanted to argue, but something in her voice stopped him. For the first time, he felt the weight of his privilege, the ease of a life where money solved everything. He didn't know what to say, so he said nothing. As spring turned to summer, Jackson found himself drawn into Willow Creek's rhythm. He started helping at the diner, at first reluctantly, clearing tables, washing dishes, anything to keep busy. The regulars teased him, calling him city boy, but their warmth chipped away at his defenses. He began to see the town through Emma's eyes, the single mother who ran the bakery, the veteran who fixed cars for free when someone couldn't pay, the kids who played in the park until dusk. Emma, too, began to see Jackson differently. Wasn't just the spoiled heir she'd expected. He had a quick wit, a surprising knack for fixing things around the house, and a quiet intensity when he listened. One evening, when the diner's ancient coffee machine broke, Jackson spent hours tinkering with it, his expensive shirt stained with grease. When it roared back to life, Emma's laugh, bright and unguarded, made his heart stutter. "You're not half bad at this," she said, tossing him a rag. He grinned, wiping his hands. "Don't tell anyone, I've got a reputation to uphold." Their marriage, initially a cold contract, began to feel like something else. They shared late-night talks on the porch, her with a mug of tea, him with a beer. He told her about his father's suffocating expectations, his dreams of painting, the pressure to be someone he wasn't. She listened, her silence, a safe harbor. In return, she shared stories of her childhood, her mother's strength, the town that raised her. But she never mentioned her illness. And Jackson didn't push, though he noticed the way she sometimes winced or moved slower than usual. One night, during a rare moment of vulnerability, Jackson admitted, "I thought this place would break me, but you're the strongest person I've ever met." Emma's smile was bittersweet. "Strength isn't always loud, Jackson. Sometimes it's just showing up." The turning point came in the fall when Emma's lupus flared worse than ever. She'd been hiding it well. But one morning, Jackson found her collapsed in the kitchen, her face pale, her breathing shallow. Panic surged through him as he called an ambulance, his hands shaking as he held hers. At the hospital, the truth came out. Emma had been battling lupus for years, untreated because she couldn't afford the medication. The doctor's prognosis was grim. Without aggressive treatment, her condition could worsen rapidly. Jackson was furious, not at her, but at himself for not seeing it, at the world for letting her carry this alone. He sat by her bedside, her hands small and cold in his. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, his voice breaking. She looked away, tears in her eyes. "I didn't want to be a burden. Not to you, not to anyone." "You're not a burden," he said fiercely. "You're everything." In that moment, Jackson made a choice. He wasn't just playing a role anymore. He loved her fiercely, completely, in a way he'd never thought possible. He contacted the best specialists, used his connections to get her into a treatment program, and paid for it out of his own savings. Not his father's money. He didn't care about the ultimatum anymore. This wasn't about Victor. It was about Emma. When Victor learned of Emma's illness, he flew to Willow Creek, expecting to find his son broken, ready to return to the fold. Instead, he found Jackson at the diner serving coffee to regulars, joking with the cook and checking his phone for updates from the hospital. Victor stormed in, his presence like a thundercloud. "This is what you choose, a dying girl and her dead-end town." Jackson faced him, calm but unyielding. "She's not dying. And this town, it's more alive than your boardrooms will ever be." Victor's anger faltered as he saw Emma, now recovering, walk into the diner. Her face was pale, but her eyes burned with the same fire Jackson had come to love. She stood beside him, her hand finding his, and addressed Victor directly. "You thought you could use me to teach him a lesson, but he's taught me something instead. That love isn't about control, it's about choosing each other." Every day the room fell silent, the regulars watching, their loyalty to Emma palpable. Victor, for the first time in his life, had no words. He saw his son, not the rebellious boy he'd tried to mold, but a man who'd found purpose. And he saw Emma, fragile yet unbreakable, a woman who'd reshaped his son's heart. The climax came when Victor returned to New York, shaken by what he'd witnessed. He'd spent decades building an empire, believing wealth and power were the only legacy that mattered. But Jackson's defiance, his choice to stay in Willow Creek, to fight for Emma, to build a life on his own terms, forced Victor to confront his own emptiness. He'd lost his wife to illness years ago, and in his grief he'd buried himself in work, pushing Jackson away. Now, seeing his son's love for Emma, he realized he'd been wrong. Victor returned to Willow Creek unannounced, this time not with demands, but with an offer. He sat across from Jackson and Emma in their small living room, his hands clasped tightly. "I was wrong," he said, the words heavy. "I thought I was teaching you strength, but you've shown me what it really means. I want to help her treatment, the town, whatever you need." Jackson was wary, but Emma, ever the peacemaker, nodded. "We don't need your money, Mr. Caroly, but we could use a father." The words hit Victor like a blow. For the first time, he saw his son not as an heir, but as a man. And he saw Emma not as a weakness, but as the heart of their family. A year later, Willow Creek was transformed, not by Victor's money, but by the community Jackson and Emma had built. The diner was renovated, a community center opened for the town's kids, and Emma's treatment was working, giving her more good days than bad. Jackson had started painting again, his work displayed in the diner. Each piece a love letter to the town that had changed him. Victor visited often, no longer the untouchable billionaire, but a man trying to rebuild what he'd lost. He and Jackson were cautious with each other, but there was hope in their shared silences, in the way Victor listened to Emma's stories or helped at the diner's annual barbecue. The final scene unfolded on a crisp autumn evening. The town gathered for a festival in the park. Emma, wrapped in a shawl, laughed as Jackson spun her gently to the music of a local band. Victor watched from a distance, a faint smile on his face, his heart lighter than it had been in years. Jackson caught his father's eye and raised a hand, a small gesture of peace. Emma leaned into him, her warmth a reminder of everything he'd fought for. As the music swelled and the stars blinked above, Jackson realized that this love family home was the true legacy he'd been searching for. And for the first time, he was free. The camera pulls back from the festival, the lights of Willow Creek glowing against the night, a voice over Emma's soft but steady. "Legacy isn't what you leave behind. It's what you build, who you love, and how you choose to live. We chose each other, and that's enough." The screen fades to black, leaving the viewer with a sense of hope, a reminder that love can heal even the deepest wounds, and a quiet urge to watch the story again, to live in its warmth just a little longer.